So now what's left is setting up our front.php file to send the dispatcher into our framework class, and then to add a listener. So let's jump back to our resource pack directory, and let's open up step 49, front.php, adding a listener using our response class. And let's copy this code, and let's copy over the code inside our front.php file and save it. Let's do a quick comparison of our front.php now and our last front.php. So last time we worked with front.php was in step 33, so let's compare these two. I'm going to go to my file comparison tool. So we're adding a bit more complexity to our front.php file, but that's okay. We'll simplify this later on. This is sort of an interim step. So first of all, just like we did in our framework.php file, we're using the event dispatcher namespace. Next, we're setting up our dispatcher by doing new event dispatcher. Next, we're going to add a listener. So when we add a listener, the first parameter is the event that we're going to listen for. We set up our response event inside of our framework.php file, so we're going to tap into that here by using the same name. Second, we're going to use a valid PHP callback. In this case, we're using a closure or an anonymous function. We could use a function name or a method name inside of a class as well. But this function will automatically get past the parameter that we passed in through our dispatcher. So this simplex response event is actually the same if we go back to our code and look at framework.php. It's the same one that we created with our dispatcher down here, new response event. Now, this is just getting passed in right here. This class is what gives us access to the variables that we actually want to work with, namely, in this case, our response and request. So in this first line of the closure, what we're doing is tapping into a method in our response event class called getResponse. Again, all this does is it grabs our response and gives it back to us. If we go back to the class in our code and take a look, we see getResponse here just returns this response, which is what we set up here in the constructor. Okay, back to our comparison. So now to step back for a moment, the goal of our listener here is to add some code to our output. Specifically, this is going to simulate what we do if we maybe wanted to add some Google Analytics code to our page. What this is actually going to do is just add this text right here, but this text could be anything. Before we do that though, we want to make sure that our response is for a valid page and not for a redirect to some other page. So we're going to check to see if it's a redirection. We're also going to check a couple other things to make sure that this isn't like a JSON request or a request for something else. So we're looking to make sure that there's a header for content type and HTML isn't in the content type. So if this is the case, we want to fail it, we're going to just return. One final check we're doing is to see if the request is an HTML format. Now this is using several techniques just to make sure that we're getting an HTML page, that's the purpose of this request. If it's anything else, it's just going to return. And if it is an HTML page request, then what we're going to do is set the content of our response, and we're going to set it to what the content was before by using getContent in our response, and then we're going to add GA code to it. So what we'd expect to see is hello world and then GA code. Finally, the other modification we need to make is that when we instantiate the framework, we need to pass the dispatcher into it. So that's what we're doing right here. So at this point, everything should be wired up together to use the listener and the event dispatcher. So let's see it in action, and then we'll come back and run through this process really quick one more time, just to make sure you have a grasp of what's going on. I'm going to go to the browser, and I'll refresh. And now you see it says, yep, this is a leap year GA code. All right, great.